Welcome to the another video in this series. And today we are going to talk about something different. Yes, this time we are going to talk about governance and optimization strategy. But do not worry, this governance and optimization strategy is something different. Uh, but we'll be continuing our security and compliance fundamentals. This is something that I was going through. Then I thought, why not put a hypothetical scenario for the audience, for the broader audience, and share this, how exactly these kind of things done, right? So let's go through the scenario first. So there is a customer initially migrated to the cloud in haste. It happens all the time because maybe you need to go through uh, out of the lease soon. Maybe you have new project coming in, you have signed a customer. There could be n number of reasons that you either need to move or need to implement more hardware or cloud on a simpler note. But because of maybe policies, internal politics, there could be many reasons. The time flies, and you just need to move everything to the cloud because the lease expired soon. Maybe any other reason. So, without fully aligning to the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, which is CAF, and well architected framework, which is WAF, uh, it wasn't aligned. The proper planning, well structured thing couldn't happen, right? Because they have just moved in hurry. So what happened gradually, due to absence of proper governance, they are now facing significant cost and operational inefficiency. Significant cost, which is a challenge in cloud because it's pay as you go. You have to pay every month. It is it's capex to opex model, right? So we have identified several issues, including unidentified virtual machines running without clear ownership, VMSQ being scaled up during peak usage but not scaled down afterwards, lack of visibility and accountability across environments. So as a result, the customer has engaged us, like you people, expert people, specialist people who know how cloud works, to implement a structured governance and optimization strategy to streamline operations, control cost, and ensure future scalability in a secure and compliant manner. Now, I'm pretty sure this scenario is clear. There is a customer who is already running a lot of applications in multiple subscription environment, let's say, but it is not well structured, it is not well governed, so resulting higher cost, operations are inefficient, and we need to go ahead, assess it, find out the reasons, apply the governance, figure out the applications, benchmarking, a lot of things we need to do. This is what we are going to talk about in our next slide. So with this understanding, we have prepared the goals. So what are the goals for this engagement? The first is optimize the cloud spend. We want to optimize it because we are paying a lot of money. Though this is this can be easily managed. So we need to identify cost saving opportunities by analyzing resource utilization. We need to aim to deliver value at the lowest price possible by figuring out so many things like reserve instances, spot instances, saving plans, correct VM size. There are a lot of things going on in cloud. If you know cloud, you know what could be the best resource for you, best service for you with the optimal price. Then we need to enhance the security. Security is always the important piece of any environment. So we need to focus on protecting applications, data, network, everything, wherever it is lagging. Operational excellence. It involves managing and automating operations to deliver business value and continuous improvement. Then cloud. Cloud is open ground, right? And governance is something that needs to be in place from all perspective, which will prevent unnecessary resource sprawl with controlled provisioning. And finally, architectural improvement. It is well-architected framework that we talked about. We need to align our architecture with the WAF best practices. So these are 5 goals that we need to achieve: optimize the cloud, enhance the security, operational excellence, improve the governance, and architectural improvement. So in order to achieve these goals, there are certain objectives that we have kept for us. So let's go through the objective one by one. So in order to understand what customer has, what they're running, how they are running, we need to do a in-depth comprehensive assessment. We need to go through all the applications, servers, and cloud workloads. We need to identify inefficiencies, gaps, dependencies, security gaps, and cost saving opportunities. Now, we need to establish the benchmarking for the utilization. It could be your servers, your apps, your DBs, all utilization metrics for all applications and infrastructure components. We need to identify underutilized or over-provisioned resources to enhance efficiency. Then we need to define and enforce the policies to ensure secure, compliant, and cost-effective cloud operations. We need to assess RBAC, resource tagging, and naming conventions, and provide the recommendations for better governance. Then we need to recommend workloads, right sizing, auto scaling, and migrate to cost effective cloud services, refactoring, identify opportunities for PaaS and serverless adoption to enhance the performance. And we need to implement to streamline management of resources. We need to implement tagging and resource classification for better visibility and cost tracking. We need to automate provisioning and deprovisioning using the DevOps practices as much as we can. So these are the objectives that we need to go through in order to fulfill the goals. So let's check the approach that we have in order to achieve these objectives. So what is the approach? The very first thing is we need the comprehensive assessment, which means discovery and data collection. So we need to gather insights for the entire IT estate. We need to uh, utilize the cloud native tools like Azure Advisor, Defender for Cloud, Azure Monitor, Cost Management to gather those insights for real time data collection. We can have log analytics, identify dependencies, security risk, and resource utilization patterns. A lot of data to get the insights out of it. We need to have a correct data from the correct sources. We need to select because they are, I said at the beginning, there are like hundreds of application, multiple subscriptions. So we need to make a pilot mapping. We need to select a representative sample of application infrastructure for an initial assessment because it's a big environment. We cannot just simply go ahead and start working everywhere, changing everything. We need to just find a representative sample of applications and the learning, the improvements we need to implement or scale it further, like in the next scale the methodology to assess all applications. So we need to establish baseline metrics for cost, security, and operational performance. That's what the baseline is all about. We need to understand the metrics. Accordingly, we would have the respective resources running. So identify optimization opportunities and create a roadmap for scaling the assessment for the future applications. Then we have we need to define and enforce policy based on Azure landing zone governance best practices, policy based, right? And Azure policy, RBAC, and tagging logs are some tools provided by Azure to well govern your environment. Right, so we could have a proper hierarchy for management group, subscription levels, resource group, proper organization of the resources, and then apply the policies and RBAC and tagging and locks. Right, then optimization planning. So as per the baseline output, we need to plan optimization. We need to identify underutilized and over provisioned resources for cost reduction. We need to recommend reserve instance, auto scaling, spot instance, right sizing, implement proactive monitoring and alerting to prevent future inefficiencies. So that would be our approach to achieve those goals by following the objectives. We need to gather the data, get the insights out of it. We need to get some representative applications and work on the baseline. Accordingly, we will apply the governance policies and the optimization and then scale it further. All right, so now we need to go ahead and figure out detailed picture of this baselining the application, which is something very important and we need to understand. Benchmarking application, how can we do that? Well, we need to identify all resources associated with the application and its dependencies, right? So inventory and dependency mapping. We can use Azure Resource Graph, we can use PowerShell, we can use CLI, we can use any other monitoring tool if they are using in the environment. Now, we would have the complete inventory of the application resources and a proper dependency graph. After this, uh, inventory and dependency mapping step. Once we have all that information about the application, the bunch of application that we have selected for this, we start the resource utilization. We start the monitoring the resource utilization. We'll gather real-time and historical performance data for resources. We'll utilize Azure Monitor for each resources or any other third-party tool that they are using. We'll use we need to gather the metrics like CPU memory, request latency, throughput for app services, DTU utilization, query performance for SQL database, CPU memory, disk IO, network bandwidth for the VMs, transaction metrics for the storage account, or we need to configure data collection in log analytics workspace for centralized monitoring. So at the end, we would have a performance and utilization reports after this, right? With the help of Azure Monitor, Log Analytics, and Application Insights. We would have, here we have all the apps and their dependencies. Now we have gathered the performance and utilization report. Right. Now we need to collect application insights. We are going deeper to the application. We need to enable the application insights for the application if it's not there already, and we can easily do that. Now, with the help of application insight, we can go deeper. We can get the information like response time, error rates, dependency failures, user load patterns, and review the performance and failures tab for the application insights. And finally, we will have the application performance report highlighting bottlenecks and usage trend. We would have the information of bottleneck and usage trends. Then we need to identify normal peak and underutilized usage pattern. To establish the utilization pattern, we need to analyze usage pattern over a representative period. It could be 15 days, 30 days, 45 days. They know better about their application. We need to use Azure metrics to view hourly, daily, and monthly usage patterns. We'll correlate usage data with business activities like peak hours or campaigns. So finally, we would have a detailed utilization pattern baseline thresholds in this step. We would have a detailed utilization pattern and baseline threshold. Okay. Now we need to simulate user activity to evaluate the application performance under varying loads, under load testing. We need to use Azure load testing or third-party tools like JMeter or Locust. We need to define the test scenarios to mimic real-world workloads. like peak user traffic, monitor resource performance during test using maybe Azure Monitor and Application Insight. So this will give us the load test result with recommendations for scaling and optimization. So load test results will get, and accordingly we can have scaling and optimization. Okay, sorry. Finally, cost benchmarking. This is something really important. We started this scenario from the cost perspective. So we need to understand the cost allocation and identify the areas of savings. Right, cost allocation, because it's a huge organization, multiple application, which means multiple business units, right? And it is running on the Azure. We are not even sure which business unit paying for what consumption, right? So we need to understand the cost allocation. We need to use tools like Azure Cost Management to analyze cost by resource, service, and application. We need to identify underutilized or idle resources contributing for unnecessary cost. Review recommendations in tools like Azure Advisor for cost saving opportunities, MS Defender for other recommendation. So finally, we would have a deeper cost breakdown reports and optimization suggestion. Then we need to ensure the application meets performance and security benchmark, which means we need to have something as per the industry standards. So our Azure well-architected framework tool will help us to evaluate the applications, compare findings with the industry standards for performance, security, and reliability, identify gaps, and prioritize improvements. So after this step, you would have a compliance report or prioritized improvement list. If you're managing any compliance, we would have that information. Now, finally, with all that information, we need to document, we need to compile a report of established benchmarks and validate with stakeholders. We'll document the baseline metrics, including resource utilization threshold, performance benchmark, and cost metrics. We need to validate the benchmarks with customer to ensure alignment with business goals. So after this step, we'll have a final benchmarking report ready for optimization planning. So what will you do? Well, because a benchmarking reports provides data. It provides data. So with data, we would have a data-driven insights into resource utilization, cost efficiency, and performance. This information is essential for implementing Azure governance and baseline policies to prevent wastage and optimize spending. So let's see how these reports, previous data-driven reports, which help us in governance implementation. Well, we can have we can use the benchmarking report to identify idle or underutilized or over-provisioned resources. We can implement Azure policies to automatically detect and deallocate unused VM storage database gateways. We can enforce budget limits using Azure cost management billing, right? So at the end, we have to configure Azure policy to alert and auto deallocate non-compliant resources or not allow people to deploy resources which are compliant as per the standard. Well, inefficient resource scaling leads to performance issues and wastage. So we need to benchmark, identify CPU memory and network bottlenecks. Use Azure auto scaling to dynamically scale resources based on real usage pattern. For example, set up Azure Monitor alerts to detect VMs exceeding 80% CPU for 10 minutes. Auto scale or move to a large queue only if sustained high usage is observed. Scale down database when DTU utilization is maybe like below 10% for 7, 8, or 10 days. Implement Azure Monitor with auto scaling rules. Right. Now, non-standard configuration increase risk exposure. Right. That's why compliance baseline standard. So the benchmarking report highlights security gaps like unencrypted storage, open ports, and missing access control. We got to use Azure Security Center, which is now MS Defender for Cloud, to apply governance policies. For example, enforce RBAC for least privileged access, block resources that are not encrypted at rest, monitor for publicly exposed endpoints, and enforce private link where required. Finally, apply policy initiatives or definitions for security compliance. Right, then unorganized resources make tracking and governance difficult. Hence, we need to use our report to track untagged resources, apply policy to enforce consistent naming and tagging standards, and enforce them. Enforcing tagging for resources, you could have that in your IAC as well if you are planning to utilize the DevOps practices. You can also apply the policy as a gate that until the tags are there, it won't allow to deploy. Right. Then finally, the architecture that we are working upon, we may have multiple resources running, but a single can take care of that. Right. So lack of alignment with the best practices reduce the efficiency. We need to align our infrastructure with the Azure well architected framework. We need to use our report or benchmark results can be evaluated against the Azure well architected framework. We need to prioritize the improvements in performance, security, cost, and operational efficiency. So we need to perform the Azure well architected review and implement governance, network security, resiliency recommendations. So that's how it will help us. Now, finally, we have the deliverables. So after finding out the uh, benchmark utilization report, after implementing the governance for the optimization, finally, we have some deliverables for our customer that we can track your project. So what we're gonna do, what we're gonna deliver to the customer, the current state analysis, all the data and the insights are getting out of it. We'll give the baseline for the applications. There are different applications running on different resources. We would have all different kind of baselines for the applications. There would be a proper report of it. We will find out the cost saving opportunities, and we will recommend and of course implement after the approval. There would be a resource tagging standards. There is a proper way to tag your resources and enforce it, naming convention and all. There would be a governance policies for resource creation and access control. There will be a detailed action plan for the optimization and a recommendation for refactoring and auto scaling. All these things would be as a deliverables that you can easily check your project is all covered end to end as it's supposed to be. So what is the outcome that we are looking after going through all these steps, all these activities? So the very first thing is the problem we started with was the cost. So definitely there would be a reduction in the cost because we are going to eliminate underutilized or idle resources. We are going to reduce unnecessary expenses. We are going to optimize workloads through right sizing, reserve instance auto scaling. There would be a proper governance in place so that people cannot just deploy resource and forget about it. You'll get the enhanced security in all aspect as per the defense in depth and zero trust. We'll implement centralized policies and automation to prevent resource sprawl. So we'll be getting government's improvement. There's a proper governance now. Because of all that, the operational will definitely be streamlining. So we can have proper automate monitoring, reduce manual effort with ISC or DevOps practices. There will be proper tagging, proper monitoring, and nobody can just deploy anything, which makes operational havoc or chaos. And once we have everything as it's supposed to be in the cloud adoption, there would be improved visibility. We'll gain real-time insights into resource utilization, security posture, and compliance. We'll ensure clear ownership and accountability with proper tagging and access policies. So these will be the outcomes after the completion of this project. This is very high level when we talk to the customer, when we need to explain them. We get into the deeper technical details once everything is signed, of course, once we win the deal and everything like that, or once our technical team get inside, then the actual benchmarking, actual assessment takes place. So do not take this session as a super high technical session, but this is more like what actually happened. It's more like there is a scenario, there is an approach to deal with such kind of scenarios, and there are proper steps, there are proper deliverables and outcomes that we should have in our mind before we plan for any such deals or projects or scope. Well, I hope it was informative. Well, thank you for watching, and you guys have a wonderful day.